There's a door opening. Now if we were going to do a window, the window is basically the same thing. Only difference with a window, you know, we'd be putting in a rough sill and cripples, which I didn't make. I should have made them for you too. I could have. There you go. So if we had a window, basically that's how we would frame a window. Actually, it would be more like this. Like that. That way I generally always put a cripple on both sides of my trimmer stud. That way when you put your window down on it, if you just put like one stud in here, all the weight of the window would be just being held up by nails. If you do it this way, the weight of the window is being supported by a stud. So I mean that's pretty much, you know, whether it's a door, here's a door, here's a window, both the same. Now, it just so happens that, you know, I'm not laying out the particular heights. You may have to, you could either do it this way. I generally like to put the header all the way up to the top. The reason I put a header all the way up to the top is, this is right on the structural member. Then when I cut my jack studs, I can wedge them underneath, and they fit real tight. You could also, if the door was down lower, you could put the header in at a lower point, if you wish, and then put cripples up. The reason I don't do that is you have your plate, you have your cripples. So you have a joint on the top of the cripple, you have a joint on the bottom of the cripple, then you have your header. To me, it gives it more room where things could, you know, let's just say your cuts are off a little. So when that compresses with the weight of the structural wall on it, you could actually get movement. If you do it this way, you only have one joint. There's a possibility of less movement. Also, you get some shrinkage when you put boards in like this. I mean, you're making headers, they're usually not 2x4s, they're usually 2x10.
Doesn't the header gotta be right at the top of the door though?
No, it doesn't have to be. You can put the header up at the top and then cripple down. In other words, let's just say this was the top of my door down here, okay?
Okay.
You know, I have a high wall, it's a 10-foot wall and the door is way down here. So I can put my header up here and then put this across, just like you would if you were framing a metal stud for the door. And then I could take cripples and I could, well, they don't work.
What's the point of the header then though?
What?
What's
No,
the
you
point of
wouldn't.
the header
No,
then?
you wouldn't, because you don't need any support there.
No, I'm saying, what's the point of the header?
The point of the header is to hold up the roof or the second floor that's going to be built up here. In other words, you have an opening in a wall. It's a weak spot because you've lost 1, 2, 3 studs, depending on how big the opening is. So that header is to span the opening that you just created. So the point of the header is when you put it in and now you build your second floor on here, it's not going to sink. If you didn't put a header in and you just had stud, you know, you just had a stud, and no header, the weight of the second floor, because you might have the second floor, and maybe the roof is going to go up on top of that. And all that weight would come down in between the opening of your door, the floor could slip. So when you put a header in there, and on your print, the print is probably going to designate the size of your headers. You know, depending on how, you know, obviously the smaller the opening, like on a 3-foot door, maybe they would call for a 2x6 header. If you have an 8-foot opening in a wall, they're going to want a 2x10 header. If you have a bigger opening than that, they might want a 2x12 header. Because the more the opening gets, the more open area that you have to support. You get what I'm saying? Okay, if you didn't have a header in here, let's do away with our header. No header. No jack studs. No, just a big opening. Okay, so now we have an opening there, right? Mm-hmm. We now start building our wall on the top of it. What's holding it up?
Nothing. No, but if you put the door in there and you put the jack stud in and everything, you put the door, but you don't have a header, you just have cripples going from the top plate to the top of the door, what's the difference?
The difference is that there's more cuts and more open spaces that could close up. There's really no difference. From a building inspector point of view, if this would be a plate, top plate, this would be a cripple, and this be a stud. Whoops, I needed a header in there. Here's a header, and here's a stud. So you wind up, you have a join here, you have a join here. So let's just say it's a sloppy cut, because usually the cripples are short. So if you have an 1/8 inch here, and let's say you have an 1/8 inch here, technically you have a 1/4 inch that could compress. When you put the weight, when the weight comes down this way, when the bearing comes down, okay?
How does the header stop that?
Okay, now, if you were to do it my way, you have a top plate here. You have a header here. Then you have your stud. You really don't have, you only have this one joint. Because this is pushed up tight. And if you cut the trimmer stud in, it'll generally hold tighter. So you get very little, you know, there's less likelihood of settlement. And the reason I did it, I mean, I was a general contractor, and I was a guy that had to come back. Went over top of the window, you got a crack, or maybe the fucking weight come down and it blew off the tape. I mean, you didn't have that shit happen. So I would try to figure ways to make it that I don't have to come back. Because after the house is in 6 months, you gotta come back, you gotta cut the fucking tape out, you gotta retape it, you gotta paint it. And hopefully they don't bitch that the paint doesn't match, you know, because the house is 6 months old. And, you know, and a little teeny repair in a spot this big can be a pain in the fucking ass. You might wind up having to paint the whole fucking wall from corner to corner in order to hide the, you know, which you guys don't think of because you're just getting paid to go back and do what they tell you to do. But when you're a guy paying for it, it's like, and trust me, there's no right or wrong way. I mean, if you look in the book, they're not going to tell you. Let's see, it has a drawing here on page 2. Actually, if you look at page 2, it shows you the rough opening the way I was showing you to do it. If you jump over to page 5, it's showing you a header the other way. I mean, there's no right or wrong way. I'm just making a suggestion. Now, if you look at page 13, it also shows you, traditionally a window, the header usually goes all the way up to the plate because that makes it a nice height. In this instance here, you look at a door, see how the door is a 2x6 and the window header is 2 2x12s? That's giving you the example, pardon? I'm on page 13. The reason the window is a 2 2x12s is because it's a larger opening. The reason the door is only a 2x6 is because it's a smaller opening. Now that shows those little tiny cripples over the top of the door. And I'll be honest with you, anytime I cut a stud that's 6 inches and you go to put it in, it usually don't fit good. It's hard to nail. It's just, you know, you just don't usually do a good job of it. You get them in there, trust me, but. And most times if it's an outside wall and you were using 2x12 headers, if you were framing with wood, every outside header that you put in would be 2x12s. You wouldn't use 2x6s over the door. The only reason you would use something smaller than a 2x12 if it lowered too much that you couldn't hang your door. Because generally when you're framing with wood, your headers are going to be whatever your joists are. If you're framing with 2x10 joists, almost always every header on the job will be 2x10s. Now, a lot of times you have to do, when we frame the door, if you frame out like a 6-foot door, you frame it out to like 70, 71 inches. Most times you have a header, and then you just have to nail maybe a piece of 2x on the bottom of it, and it would lower it to proper height. But that's all just part of being on a job site and doing whatever works. And again, either way, there's no right or wrong. I just think the one way is more right than the other way. But you are going to have to know the different terms, of which I'll go over. And then when you make a header up, like I say, you make your header to be the width of the wall that you're putting in. And most times when you're framing, wood frame, you're using 2x, 4s. So if you take a 2x, a piece of OSB board or plywood, whatever you're using, you put them together, it then becomes the exact same width as a wall. See it? So when you rock, everything's perfectly smooth.
Right, and I've made box headers like that before out of metal, but they don't put nothing in between.
No.
They just have you pull it tight to the track,
To the track, yeah.
and then clamp it and screw it all together.
Yeah, well, the box
And then there's a
headers,
gap in the middle.
the box headers, you buy them, right? They're already purchased.
We build them.
But I mean, you can buy box headers, I know,
Oh,
so. Now, how do you build them out of a box? How do you build a box header?
Couple pieces of track and a couple pieces of stud. Put the track down and lay the stud down in it, and screw it to it. Put a piece of track on top. Put the two studs like facing the soft sides facing each other.
You mean upright or
Yeah,
horizontal?
laying down in the track,
Right,
facing with the soft sides facing each other.
right.
And then you screw it to the track on the bottom, and then you put the track on the top of it with the two pieces.
Oh, I
inside,
mean,
and you
touching one another.
But you pull them so they're not. So you pull them apart so they're not touching one another, so they're as wide as the studs are.
You're losing me.
Like you just have the piece of plywood
This
in
is
between
piece
there.
of- Yeah.
You don't have nothing in between it. But if you don't have anything in between it, then there's gonna be
Oh,
a gap.
I got you. But you're doing them this way. Okay. You're not doing them flat ways. You're doing them just like this. You're
Yeah.
taking a piece of plate, a stud, piece of plate, stud, the two soft sides facing each other,
Right, and having the stud laying down.
and having a stud sit on top of the opening. Yeah, okay.
The-
And they're using the stud
Make the box header.
to beef it up a little bit. Yeah. Instead of just doing a.
Well, it's basically the same thing that you're
Yeah,
doing
exact
here.
same thing. Instead of doing 2 ears and not having a header on top of the door. Right? Like a lot of times you'll just take,
Overcut it a couple inches.
overcut a couple inches, bend it down, screw it in, put a couple cripples in and go up to up to the top plate, whatever it is. I got you, yeah. Now, again, that kind of stuff pretty much has to be determined by the engineers or architects because, and again, I am not as familiar with metal as you guys are, You guys are, much more proficient with metal studs than I am. Really, I mean, I kind of sort of know metal studs, but I'm not big on, like, as far as knowing box headers and what's acceptable for openings and all, I don't know. And I'm sure that's on the prints that you're following. If you're making a box header up, it says to do that on the print. For some reason, it makes it a little stronger. Again, less likely to dip. Like, let's just say, from the top of your door to the top track, maybe you're 6 feet high. Well, if you were to just put ears on a piece and put studs in it and hang your rock on it, that weight might be enough to make it bow a little bit. So just by making the box header that you're making, it gets that much stronger that it would support. Because what you're doing is you're taking plate, stud, and then a plate on the top, right? In other words, you've got just what I have here. and then you're taking a piece of plate. This is not plate, I understand, but